So this video is not going to really be much of a tutorial, but rather showing my complete stupidity as well as kind of what I'm having to do to resolve it and the importance of actually having proper scale in your Blender projects before actually making those, well, exporting everything over to Unreal Engine. So a quick rundown of what I've had to do as a result of this is if we go to character, everything related to the first person stuff other than textures, including all of the weapons and animations, I've had to completely remove. The third person stuff, good to go. Now, the reason for this was because of my Blender unit scale. So for example, let me go to the M1 carbine because that's how it is. No, it's still the same. If we look here, my unit's set to 1. Now this was fine because just about every animation, like such as the weapons and stuff that I would export, same thing with the arms, we would just increase the unit scale by 100. Well, when we exported the weapon out like the M1 carbine, including the skeleton, we did the same thing. We increased the unit scale. I mean, not the unit scale, the importing scale to 100. So that way, it wasn't insanely tiny and it would actually kind of fit like it was the proper size. Now, the issue with that was I started working on the third person animations for the actual weapon, which required, well, for the third person, let me head over there. The actual scale and stuff like that was set properly. So if I come over here to the third person project for the M1 carbine, actually 1911 for the M1 carbine, I mean the 1911 for the third person, this is where I started on, I had some issues. Just attach that back up. So the unit scale in this case was set to 0.01, which is how you kind of want to set it up to have it correspond to Unreal Engine. And the reason this caused an issue, well, what actually was the issue was the weapon animation specifically. So the third person animations, because the skeleton and the mesh and everything was exported at the proper unit scale and setup, that all worked perfectly. So the reload animation, for the actual human was fine, exactly how it was in Blender. But the weapon, on the other hand, you couldn't even visibly see it. So the scaling was off super far, and no matter what you tried to do to resize it, scale it, and all that kind of stuff, both in Blender as well as in Unreal Engine, I couldn't get anything to work. It all just the mesh was completely broken and all that kind of stuff. And when I went through and re-imported the 1911 with the new skeleton, well, with like everything set up for the proper Blender scale to the new, sorry, let me rephrase that. When I exported the 1911 with the correct unit scale and imported into Unreal Engine and tried to retarget the old 1911 animations, it started having some issues there as well, specifically regarding the slide. So the slide, for example, was offset, but the animation still played, but there were some issues. So I want to go ahead and show you a quick little example on me resetting up the project properly for the first person arms and the 1911. So let me just minimize all this out of the way. And I'm just going to go ahead and open up a new Blender. So I'm going to get started on the actual 1911. So in order to do that, I need some first person arms to animate with. So what I have here, again, I'm still using the Insurgency Sandstorm rig. Now I went through and I've set this up a little bit better. So by default now, it's all cleaned up. It's all in one collection. So we have the materials for each part, as well as the armature and everything is scaled properly. And most importantly, when we come over here to units, the unit scale is set to 0.01. So what this allows me to do is I can take this, drag it into my project, hit append, go to collection, and open up the arms. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's fine. Well, I still haven't set the unit scale. So I go to 0.01, and then that usually I've noticed it has a tendency to create an issue, at least for me. So what I usually have to do first is I set the unit scale, and then I will import. And then for whatever reason, it works properly. So it's very important to set the unit scale beforehand, at least in my case, before doing anything. Now I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm just going to call it temp because I already have one for this, and save it, temp.blend. And now I want to bring over the 1911. So what I can do here, I already have the third person one working. I want to go to the third person here, open it up and look at it real quick to make sure the 1911's good to go. So we have the, minimize all that. So yeah, we have the armature and the frame and everything is at the correct scale. So I'm just gonna drag and drop it, append, collection 1911, and here it is. So I'm just gonna rename armature to just, well, from armature 02 to just armature. And what exactly is this? Oh, let me delete that. That's the old, I think. Yeah. Okay, so let me get rid of collection. Now we have the 1911, as well as the armature and everything inside of it. So what we can do is we can click on the weapon and the mesh, because we have the proper unit scale and everything now. File export as FBX. I already have my own preset. Just gonna call it, yeah, temp FBX again. That'll work. Now, I come down here to the 1911. I'm just gonna import the temp because I'm only calling it temp for the tutorial, well, example. Uniform scale, just leave everything as default, scaling set to 1. There's no corrections that need to be needed or anything like that. Wait for this to finish. There we go. Shouldn't have any real issues. And now we can actually look at it. So I'm going to open up the skeleton because there's something else that I want to show you. So we have the root bone is literally called root, and that's because when you import with the actual kind of like the armature, the skeleton, if you just name it armature and you import it to Unreal Engine will ignore where it's anything that's just named armature. So if I was to have this how it was before, like armature.001, the root would be armature.001, and then it would go to the root, which we don't want. So that's why we call it armature. And from here, once you've done this once, this can be named whatever. And whenever you're exporting animations, when you go to import the animations, even if this is named differently, instead of armature, you just select the skeleton and you should be good to go. It should still, work with this setup without actually interfering with anything, so you don't have to worry about it. It's just that initial import that is crucial. Now, the next issue that we currently have, if we look over here at the root, you can see here's the center. So so this little dot right here is the world origin, and it's at the dead center. So this little dot is where this square spot is, where my cursor is, and this little round spot where that little triangle kind of meets of the armature for the root bone is where this circle is. So it's currently being offset from the world origin. So any animation that we do, like export or anything like that, it's going to be offset a little bit. So what we need to do is we need to take the root bone and put it exactly at the world center. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the armature like I already have, go to edit mode, select the root, and I'm going to be dragging it up as close as I can. Zoom in really far and position it right there on the dot. And zoom back out. And now what we can do is we can click on the mesh and then the skeleton or the armature and re-export it. Now when we go back into Unreal Engine, I'm going to right click and re-import and look at it again. So now you can see for the root, the only thing you see is that little circle. It's not being offset. So that means our animations for our pistol, no matter where they're at, for example, I could take this, just the armature, I could move it up here and create a little animation and export it right here as is. So for example, let's say we have it attached to our hand. We don't have to worry about recentering it or anything like that. It's going to be imported and the origin is going to be correct. So that's just one thing we don't have to worry about. It's mostly just getting that initial import correct. So now that this is good to go, we know we have our pistol done. I'm going to go ahead and import the arms. So I'm going to select the clothing, the gloves, and the fingers. Whoops. As named here. And I'm going to rename armature to just armature. I almost forgot to do that. So now I'm going to select the clothing, the gloves, the arms, and then the armature, and export. And I'm going to give it a name. I'm actually going to be using this one, so I'm going to call it FPS arms. I'm going to go to Word Dev. I'm just going to overwrite the one I currently have. Make sure my setup's correct. And now we're going to import the arms. So character FPS arms. Here's where I'm going to slap them in. And leave everything the same. I am not going to create materials because I believe I have them already, the actual materials in here. Yes, I do. So now I open up the arms. Everything looks good to go. I'm just going to go ahead and set the stuff. So I believe this is the shirt. No, that's the gloves. And then here's the shirt. And now we have, go to the skeleton. Now we have the animations and everything set up nice and good to go. Well, not the animations, but the mesh and the scaling is all just a one-to-one. That's what gives us a proper physics asset that gets generated as well. Because when we do like how I had it previously at the unit scale of 1 right here, your physics asset would be all really kind of jacked up. You might only have a couple, and some bones will probably won't even have any physics assets on them. So that's another reason. So when we do our third person mesh and stuff like that, it's very critical to have that if you're going to be using the physics assets. So yeah, we're pretty much good to go. That's just about everything I can think of for explanations on issues regarding Blender and exporting into Unreal Engine. This is specific to skeletal meshes. If you're just making static meshes like all of these objects here, it's not a big deal. It really doesn't matter at all. But anything that's a skeletal mesh, such as this mystery box, for example, I have to go through and I have to redo that strictly because of the unit scale. Well, I don't have to, but I'm going to anyways. And that's why it's very critical to have everything set up from the start. So I have probably 6 to 8 hours of animations to recreate. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and release this video early on, just as an example to show you the hopefully kind of help anyone out that is struggling with this, or maybe you learned something. So yeah, I hate my life.